Why do some people still smoke, even with everything we know about the risks? We tend to think of it as a personal choice, right? But the real story is so much deeper, and it's tied to one of the most overlooked parts of our lives, our jobs.
We're always told that smoking is a choice. But if that's really true, then why are smoking rates so incredibly high in some groups and not others? Well, a really groundbreaking study from 2004 suggests that maybe we've been asking the wrong questions all along. Maybe it's less about individual willpower and a whole lot more about the circumstances of our lives.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll dive into the smoking disparity puzzle. Then, we'll reveal the missing piece that changes everything: occupation. We'll explore how we even measure class and uncover a shocking paradox about quitting. We'll see what happens when disadvantages stack up, and finally, why the word class is so critical for public health.
You know, for decades, public health campaigns have gone after smoking, and they've definitely had some big wins. But a stubborn problem is still with us. Smoking rates remain sky high for certain groups of people, and it's not just about how much money they have or how much school they've had.
To really get our bearings, let's look at the data this study was using from back in the year 2000. So at the turn of the millennium, about a quarter of American adults were current smokers. But that 26% wasn't spread out randomly across the population, not even close. It was concentrated.
So when we talk about these kinds of health gaps, the conversation almost always turns to two things: income and education. The less money you make, the less schooling you have, the worse your health is likely to be. And while there's some truth to that, the researchers behind this study said, hold on, that is not the whole story.
They believed we've been missing a huge piece of the puzzle, a factor that ties both income and education together and has a powerful effect all on its own: your occupation, what you actually do for a living.
And the researchers really framed it perfectly. Think about it. A job isn't just how you use your education to make money. The nature of the work itself, the stress levels, the physical dangers, how much control you have over your own time, that's a powerful force that literally shapes your health and your behaviors. So, if we're going to look at the effect of jobs, we need a way to group them together. And this is where the study gets really clever. It showed that the way you choose to categorize jobs can totally change the picture you end up seeing.
See, at the time, the typical way to do this in the US was just to sort jobs into these big, simple buckets, like white-collar or blue-collar. But this study also used a model from the UK that was way more nuanced. It looked at things like your level of authority, your job security, and your working conditions. And when they used that lens, the real patterns of smoking just snapped into focus. And by using that sharper lens, the researchers found something that just completely turns our common assumptions about smoking on their head. We'll call it the quitting paradox.
Okay, get ready for this. When you ask smokers, have you tried to stop for at least one day in the past year, look at the numbers. They are basically identical across the board. Whether you're in a high-status job or a low-status one, about 44% of people are trying to quit. The desire, the motivation, it's universal.
But now, look at this. When you ask who actually succeeded in quitting, the picture just falls off a cliff. The success rate gets cut in half, dropping from 22% for people with the most resources all the way down to a staggering 11% for those with the fewest. This just proves it was never really a question of willpower. It's not that some people don't want to quit, everybody wants to quit. The real difference is who has the resources, the stability, and the support systems to actually turn that desire into a reality.
The study didn't even stop there. Next, it looked at what happens when these different disadvantages, education, occupation, and income, start to pile up on top of each other.
Let's just watch how this builds, using the data for white men as a really clear example. Okay, start with having less than a college degree. The smoking rate is already at 33%. Now add a working-class job into the mix. It jumps to 39%. And finally, layer on a low income.
And it skyrockets to 49%, almost 1 out of every 2 people. This is the compounding power of social disadvantage. These aren't just single risk factors. They stack up to create this massive, crushing weight. So what is the big takeaway from all of this? It's that we have to start thinking about social class as something much more complex than just looking at who falls below the poverty line.
And this is absolutely key. The study defines working class not by your paycheck, but by the nature of your job. Many people in these kinds of jobs, think construction, service work, retail, they aren't technically poor by government standards, but their daily work conditions create specific stresses and hurdles that have a huge impact on their health.
And that's exactly why this matters so much.
If our public health efforts only focus on people who are officially living in poverty, we are completely missing this massive group of working-class people who are carrying an enormous unfair share of the burden of smoking.
So, let's just quickly recap the big points. Smoking is shaped fundamentally by your occupational class. The will to quit is the same for everyone, but the ability to succeed is not. Social disadvantages stack up with a devastating effect. And finally, using class as a lens is absolutely critical if we want to really understand and fight for health equity in our society. Ultimately, this investigation forces us to see smoking not as some simple personal failing, but as something that's deeply woven into the fabric of our society. And it leaves us with one final crucial question. If the conditions of our work have this much power over who can quit smoking, what else about our health, our well-being, and our very lives is it shaping every single day?